Hi there, and thanks for joining us again. This is the third of our bite-sized videos on IP. The first one looked at trade secrets, the second one looked at trademarks, and this one we're going to take a more holistic view of IP. I'm joined, of course, by John Pryor of Exhort IP, and he's going to talk us through how SMEs can use IP to drive value. And I suppose it's worth starting with the statistic that I often hear, John, and that's that 80% of business value is held in intangible assets, such as IP, patents, trademarks, etc. Is that true, do you think? And if so, why?
I think it's true, but of course it varies by industry. I think if we step back in time, somebody said the other day to me, you were a very wealthy man if you held tracts of land and you were a farmer and you farmed that land. 100 years ago, you were a very wealthy man if you had substantial factory production capabilities and you can manufacture goods, such as cars, for example. Today, you're a very wealthy man if you've got great ideas. And so if that is the case, then clearly protecting those ideas is really important. But to substantiate that statement, if you look at the Standard & Poor's 500 indices, the majority value in those businesses 40 years ago was in their fixtures and fittings, their tangible assets, their fixed assets, the stuff you could see, plants, machinery, etc., cars, vehicles, and buildings. Now it's the other way around. Now 80% is in intangible assets, and the fixed part, the visible part, if you like, has diminished to sort of 20%. And if you take a company like Microsoft, of course, nearly 100% of that business value is wrapped up in intangible assets. Of course, software is intangible, and the know-how, and of course, patents and trademarks and brands and so on and so forth connected to that business. And whilst they do have a substantial campus, that's not where the value is. The value is in all of the above. So I think that's a fair representation, David. And of course, it varies by industry and by business, but it's a really important statement because I don't think, on the whole, certainly business textbooks, for example, have caught up with that. And it's a very important fact for people to understand.
Yeah, and it always surprises me. I feel, having worked in the IP sphere for many years, that culturally IP businesses in the UK, or businesses in the UK, don't necessarily prioritize IP. If you're a founder, capturing IP and protecting IP would be way down the list of priorities, which is always surprising to me. Certainly when you compare us to, say, the US, where most businesses don't start without a trademark in place or a patent application being made. So it's a very different culture. I just wanted to get a sense from you how you think that disadvantages UK business if they don't prioritize IP.
Yeah. Oh, this is a very long answer. Sorry, this is a very big question, David, and I'll try and give you a shorter answer. I think you're right. I think there's a distinct lack of understanding, not just in the UK, and maybe also in the US, amongst business leaders. And in part, that's because of the absence of education. The survey that was done recently showed that business schools all over the world weren't properly educating on intellectual property. But the point is, the game in the United States is much different from in the UK. And so businesses eventually get wind of the fact that they need to actually capture and register intellectual property, because otherwise they'll be taken out, or they'll be weakened, or they'll be hauled beneath the waterline by competitors who use all available tools to compete. And intellectual property is just another one of those tools with which they'll use to compete with you in the United States. It's a little bit less harsh in the UK and in Europe, but it's changing. We've seen this in Japan, for example, where it was just incredibly gentlemanly between businesses, and there was very little dispute or litigation. But patents are now much more used as open, not warfare, but open, competitive tools in that economy. So without having, it's kind of okay if you're playing in the UK market, but if a US or a foreign competitor comes into the UK market and competes with you, they may start to attack you on your intellectual property. But if you want to go overseas, particularly into the United States, and unfortunately, history is littered with UK companies that have faltered in the United States over legal disputes, many of which are connected to intellectual property. It's really important to take charge of this, and as soon as you can.
So that's one very good reason why businesses should be looking at protecting their IP. Can you give any other reasons why capturing and commercializing and enforcing, if necessary, IP is an important part of any business process?
Yeah, I mean, at the very basics, of course, you are capturing value for stakeholders in your business, because there might be investors, clearly there's employees, there are other people who are suppliers, there are people connected to your business. And if you're not protecting what's important or all the competitive advantages, and that gets eroded, then the value in your business diminishes, and the value of the stakeholders' investment in your business diminishes as well. So I think that's it's a really, really important point. I can't quite remember. So and then the other part of that is just being able to compete. Being able to compete. The last thing you want is for somebody to, it happened, I think, years ago with a Sony PlayStation. I vague memories of this, but I think they sort of were about to launch and then realized they didn't have freedom to operate, and somebody pointed this out, and there was likely to be some patent litigation, so they had to delay the whole launch by a year. I might have garbled that story, but it was certainly an intellectual property issue that they had, and it delayed the launch by a year, which is substantial in terms of revenues and financial profit. So getting things like the IP sorted out as soon as possible is really important for all people involved in the business.
Yeah, that makes sense. So we've established that IP is valuable, and there's a number of reasons why businesses should be capturing IP. How does a kind of a SME start the process of identifying, which is not as easy as it sounds, identifying its IP, and then capturing it and commercializing it? Obviously, that's a big question, but in a bite-sized kind of answer, could you point businesses in the right direction?
Yeah, I think there's some expert advisors that they could engage with, but really, it's about doing that audit. It is about sitting down and sort of getting your team together and saying, what is our competitive advantage? What is it that drives our success in the marketplace? What is it that we have that the others don't have? And are there barriers to entry around about what we have? And if not, can we build moats around our castle to prevent the attackers from gaining entry and stealing a lead on us using our IP? And so if you start to think about it in those terms, what is it that drives your competitive advantage? What is your secret sauce? Then you'll start to identify these things quite quickly. And some of those will be your branding, your reputation in the marketplace. Some of them will be your know-how. And some of them will just be as simple as your ability to innovate and come up with new ideas and your expertise in a certain sector. But once you've started to identify those and capture those and their relative importance to your business and your business value, you can then start to think about how you best protect them. And of course, intellectual property comes along to help in those points, but in its broadest sense, not just patents and trademarks, but looking at know-how and data and copyright and domain names and trade secrets, etc.
Okay, that's been great. I think we'll wrap it up there. I mean, I think the take home is, even if a business doesn't think it has intangible assets, it does. And it's always worth investigating, whether that's getting external advice or doing an internal audit yourself, to investigate what intangibles you own, and then taking steps to protect it where you can, for the reasons you gave earlier.
And notwithstanding that, ultimately, if you've done all of the above, you will protect the value within your business, but enhance the value for any future event, M&A, exit, flotation, further investments, etc. Because if you can point to these value driving aspects and they're clearly articulated and protected, they have value and they can be invested in. So I think that's a really important component as well, David. But yeah, thanks very much for that.
Good. As ever, if you've got any questions, get in touch with John and he'll be happy to answer them, and we'll see you next time. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Bye now.